Hi there everyone, it's Misty here. Welcome to a new series on my channel that I'm calling the Spoonie Diaries. So my goal for this series is for us to sit down and talk about issues that those of us with chronic illness face. So if you're unfamiliar, the Spoonie theory, I will link some articles down below. A Cliff's Notes version is a spoonie is someone who suffers from a chronic illness, and spoons are like energy levels. So if you ever heard someone say, I woke up with no spoons today, or I don't have very many spoons left, they're not talking about literal spoons. It's a way to measure and talk about energy levels. And it could be physical energy, it could be mental, emotional energy. It's just a way to discuss your energy level, etc. And there's more to it. Like I said, that's a very small Cliff's Note version. So I will leave some links down below. But basically, a lot of people who have chronic illness or invisible illnesses kind of identify as a spoonie. I don't know how else to say it. You've never heard me say it that way. I do tag that in my Instagram post because I am a spoonie. I have 3 chronic illnesses, 4 chronic illnesses, 5 chronic. I have at least a handful of chronic illnesses. So what my goal is for this series is for us to have a conversation about issues that affect those of us with chronic illness specifically, that like getting diagnosed and what do you do after you've been diagnosed, and how to be an advocate for yourself, and how do you just get out of bed when you feel absolutely horrible. I want to have these types of discussions, etc., and just give us a place to share our journeys and get support, etc. So, just leave if there are any topics you want me to discuss. I really want this to be a conversation, as much of a conversation as we can have on YouTube. If we decide later that maybe we want a Facebook group, we can think about doing that for sure. So I thought I would kind of kick off the first episode with kind of what my journey has been with my chronic illnesses. So this may be a long one, so you may want to grab a coffee. Sucking down one today. So for those of you who may be new, my name is Misty. Did I say that? I don't remember. My world turned upside down in October of 2016. I went to bed, and when I woke up the next day, something was wrong. I remember sitting on I will remember that day probably for forever. I can't remember my last name or my zip code sometimes, but I can remember, I'll always remember that. I remember sitting on the bed, getting dressed as Rob was getting dressed to go to work. And I was like, something's not right. I was like, I don't know if I slept wrong or if I have a crick in my neck or what. I was like, something's not right. And over the next 2 weeks, it got progressively worse. I mean, at one point, it was like I struggled to hold up a toothbrush to brush my teeth. I struggled to wash my hair. I struggled to hold my fork and feed myself. So after 2 weeks, I really decided that it was time to go see my primary care physician, and I did. And I knew just by looking at his face that he thought it was something serious. And I was like, are you going to tell me what you are testing me for? And he's like, nope, I'm not going to. He's like, because you're going to go look it up. And he's like, there's nothing we can do until we get the blood work back. So come to find out, he was testing me for Guillain-Barré. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that. Disease. It's basically it's a virus. And then there's myasthenia gravis, which is what I ended up being diagnosed with. He was basically testing for a neuromuscular junction disorder in the blood. Blood work came back fine. And he was like, oh, I think it's just neuropathy from your diabetes. And I went home and told Rob, I was like, this is not neuropathy. I was like, I said, I'll get my blood sugars down, because at that time they were kind of elevated. I said, I'll get my blood sugars down. I was like, but this is not going to go away. So the whole month of December was a struggle. And I remember after Christmas break, because I took 2 weeks off for Christmas break. The morning I was scheduled to go back to work, I had long hair, and I put shampoo on the top of my head, and I could not hold my arms up long enough to work the shampoo through my hair. And I went that day and I chopped it all off, and it's been short ever since. A few weeks later, I ended up at the doctor's office because I was having really bad pain in my like right side. I thought I had a kidney infection, and I went to a different doctor because my doctor was out after having surgery on his misty brain, his neck. He had neck surgery. And she's like, I really think this is a pinched nerve. Let's get you an MRI and we'll send you to pain management. And by the time I saw the pain management doctor, I'm pretty sure, I mean, that was January. And I think by the time I saw the pain management doctor, it was the 1st of March. I mean, it was a hot minute. And by that point, I was missing a ton of work because there were literally some days I could not get out of bed. I could not, like, there was no way that I could take a shower and get dressed and drive and then walk in. Like, there was just no amount of, like, I just physically could not do it. There were days that Rob would have to dress me. He would put on my bra and he'd put on my pants and he'd put on my shirt and he would have to put on my shoes. I mean, it was just, there were times where I remember us going out to eat and he had to cut up my food. You know, it had just gotten to the point where it was so debilitating. It was so debilitating. And I remember going to that appointment. It was a Wednesday. And the only reason why I remember that is because I had missed work on Monday and Tuesday. And I remember waking up that morning and I could just barely move. Like I had several things going on at this point. And so when I went and saw him, I actually saw the physician's assistant first. And she went and got him because at this point I'd already had a neck MRI and had I had the lumbar yet? I think so. I think I'd had both. And he was like, there is nothing on the MRI that shows that you should be having this kind of issue. He said, I really want to refer you to a neurologist. So got referred to a neurologist who was a quack. Oh my word. Oh my word. My appointment as a new patient plus a nerve conduction study was 10 minutes long. 10 minutes long. And I was like, this is some bull crap bullshit. So, and he was like, I'll see you in 6 weeks. It's going to take that long to get the blood work back. And I was just like, that's not true. I know it's not going to take, like, I was just completely irritated with him. But I'm still going to the pain management. And at this point he had sent me for physical therapy, aqua, in the water. So I was doing physical therapy in the water. And I remember after that first session, I called Rob sobbing. Rob is my husband, by the way. I was sobbing because it took me 45 minutes to get my clothes back on after getting out of the pool and I did like 3 sessions of physical therapy and I finally said, I can't do this anymore. This is making things worse. So my next appointment with my pain management was like March 31st. It was either the 30th or the 31st. I'm not really sure. And by this point, they'd already gotten the test results back from the neurologist. So I saw, I don't know, physician's assistant, nurse practitioner. I don't remember. I think her name was Cherish. I don't remember. But she said, there are a couple, like I had spinal stenosis and cervical stenosis. There was permanent nerve damage. I think it was permanent and acute nerve damage in my neck. All these other things, but nothing really to do with the weakness in my arms and my legs. And I mean, they were like, oh God dang. It's just bad. So anyway, I was like, okay. So I went home and later that evening she called me and I normally don't answer the phone, but I thought I recognized the number and she's like, hey, this is so-and-so from the pain management. She's like, there was a second page to your report and I missed it. I was like, okay. And she was like, I don't want you to Google this. And you're, okay, I'm already on alert. She's like, but you have a neuromuscular junction disorder. And she's like, think along the lines of muscular dystrophy, ALS. And I was just like I don't know how I got off the phone with her before breaking down. But the minute I turned off, like the minute she said goodbye, I lost it. When Rob walked in the door, I was sobbing so hard. You know how you're doing that ugly cry and you're like, like I couldn't catch my breath. I was just sobbing and he was like, what's the matter? And I was like, I may have ALS. I may be dying. And like, I was so pissed off Number one, that she told me that shit on the phone. And I was so angry because it's like, you know, you don't survive ALS. If you don't know what ALS is, it's Lou Gehrig's disease. And it is a slow, painful, horrible death. And it can take years. And you lose all of your ability, like all of your mobility. Most people end up in a wheelchair. I mean, it's just really, really bad. If you guys remember a few years ago, they were doing the Ice Bucket Challenge to raise awareness for ALS because there was not a whole bunch of research. So it's just, and I grew up watching, you know, Jerry Lewis telethons. So, you know, we had 2 stations, and every, you know, Labor Day, that whole weekend was Jerry Lewis telethon. So I knew what those diseases were, and I knew that they weren't something that, I knew it wasn't good news. So I went and saw my primary care physician after that, and I was like, you know, can you send me, I told him who I saw as a neurologist, and he was like, you should have came to me. And he's like, I would have never sent you there. So he sent me to somebody new. And at this point in the game, Rob was having to go with me to every single appointment. He already is now, but I had anxiety so bad that he just had to come with me. So I went and saw this new neurologist, and he was a night and day over the other neurologist. My appointment was about 45 minutes long. We sat down and had all these discussions. He mentioned, you know, he thought it might be MS or, you know, something along those lines, a neuromuscular junction disorder, you know, exactly what the other doctor had said. But he wanted to do, he's like, your nerve conduction study. He's like, that didn't show anything. He's like, there's no levels or anything. So he sent me to Baylor's sports rehabilitation, I think, to have a nerve conduction study done. If you are due to have a nerve conduction study done, it's painful. It's really, really painful. And I had no idea. I mean, I looked it up on YouTube, and there's this lady and this guy, and she's like, and he, you know, he was just sitting there, but it's so painful. The needles like this big, they stick it in your arm to get to the muscle, and then, or the nerve, and then they shock it. And then the worst one was, they put what looked like a 9-volt battery on my arm right here, and they shocked me 100 times. 10 sets of 10. And it was just so painful. And 2 days, upper body and lower body. And he said, he's like, I don't see anything. He said, but I do see, you know, you have carpal tunnel, blah, 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 blah. So when I went back to the neurologist, he was like, you know, there's just nothing. So at this point, I'm like, you know, I was getting comments on YouTube about how I was a hypochondriac, and I'm just making this all up in my brain, and it's because I'm lazy. And I got to a point where I'm like, I was questioning myself, but my body was speaking the truth, and I knew there was something wrong with me. So I went back to the doctor, and I was like, where are we going to next? Because that's the one thing when you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to keep pushing. And that's a video I want to talk about. If you guys would be interested in, let me know down below. So, he was like, let's try a rheumatologist. I was like, okay. So I went to a rheumatologist with UT Southwestern, and it was the worst appointment of my life. Like, yeah. I just could tell. I could just tell that she didn't want anything to do with me because I was fat. She also had really bad hygiene for a doctor. Like, really bad hygiene for a doctor. And the appointment was just worthless. Like, it was absolutely worthless. So I'll go see the doctor again. The follow-up appointment to see, you know, what the result, because they called me and said nothing was wrong with me. So I went and saw my regular doctor, and he was like, what did you think of that rheumatologist? And I said, I wasn't impressed. And she had implied in her notes that there was nothing wrong with me, and I just wanted to stay home because I'm fat. And but at this point, I was just defeated. I was like, I can't. And luckily by this time, we got a postcard in the mail, and Rob's like, oh, look at this. This is this new thing through my work, and it's an app called Second MD, and it's basically a way for you to get a second opinion from, you know, professionals, experts in their field all over the U.S. So I sent in my information and they connected me with a neurologist at Columbia University. And she and I talked for, I think our consult was about 20 minutes. And she was like, okay, she's like, you need to see a neurologist who specializes in neuromuscular junction disorders. And she said, you need a single fiber nerve conduction study done. And I said, okay. So I went to my doctor and I said, I need to see a neurologist who so specializes in, neuromuscular junction disorder, and I need a single fiber nerve conduction study done. So he called UT Southwestern. They got me in to see a neurologist, and I knew the minute she found something. Like, it was on her face that she had found something. And she's like, I can't give you a diagnosis. That's not what this appointment was. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I had to make another appointment. And when I went back and saw her, she was like, it's either myasthenia gravis or I can't remember what the other one was. But the other one is caused by single cell lung cancer. So she was like, I'm going to put you on Mestinon. I take pyridostigmine, which is the generic. And she's like, if this helps your symptoms, or she had told me in that other appointment, ask your doctor to prescribe this, Mestinon. She's like, and if your symptoms go away, then it's myasthenia gravis. And he prescribed it, and my symptoms were lessened. They didn't go away completely, but it definitely lessened my symptoms. So by this point, that was July, and on June 3rd, I had met with the dean where I'd worked, and because I worked for a college, and I had put in my resignation. And that was probably the hardest thing that I'd ever done. But I didn't know at that point. I remember telling my primary care physician, I was like, we have to figure this out. I said, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk by the end of September, by the end of the summer. And he was like, if they can't, because he sent me to UT Southwestern. If you're unfamiliar, that is the University of Texas teaching hospital. He's like, if they can't figure you out, he's like, then we're going to send you to the Mayo Clinic. And of course, like I said, I went there and I got diagnosed. And August 4th was my last day at my job. And it was such a relief to finally have a diagnosis. But at the same time, the diagnosis is that it's something that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And I remember, I think I said it several times in a video. I was like, I just want it to be treatable. It's like, I don't care if I have to take a pill for the rest of my life. Just let it be treatable, because I wasn't ready to die. Is anybody ever ready to die? You know what I mean? So it was a blessing that it's something that's treatable, but it's also something that I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. And they call myasthenia gravis kind of like the snowflake disease, because every person who has it experiences something different. So it's been a lot. I remember joining a Facebook group for people with myasthenia gravis, and I had to leave. Like, I think I just unfollowed it, and I was just crying. I was like, what's the matter? I was like, some of these people, he's like, it was just too much. Like, I don't want that to be my future. And I knew that I would just, agonize over it. So I just finally had to leave that group, or at least unfollow it. Oh, sorry, tripod. So, in September of that year, I went and saw a neurosurgeon, because we had addressed the myasthenia, which was the weakness, but we hadn't addressed the nerve issues in my neck and my back. I did have an epidural in my neck, I think April 26th of 2017, and it didn't help at all. So I went and saw a neurosurgeon, I think it was September, and he diagnosed me with a disease called OPLL, and it's the ossification of the posterior longitudinal ligaments. And basically, the ligaments that run north and south in my spinal canal are calcifying. On top of that, I have something called spinal stenosis, and that's where your spinal canal is narrowing. And it causes a lot of issues, because it compresses the nerve, it compresses the spinal cord, it can cause paralysis. It can really cause a lot of problems. And so he basically said, I can't operate on you until you lose 200 pounds. You're closer to 200 pounds, and basically kind of sent me on my way. So, in September, I also started immune suppression therapy. My neurologist wanted me to wait until I was done with my job, because my job was working with kids and college students, basically petri dishes all day. So once I had left my job, I started mycophenolate, which is the generic of Cellcept. And Cellcept is a drug that they give to transplant patients to help with, so they don't reject their transplant. So everything was kind of going okay until February or March of 2018. So at this point, I'd started keto in March of 2017. So the whole entire time all this was happening, I was doing keto. I was, dropping inches. I think I only lost 20 pounds in that first 6 months. But there's a huge difference in the size of my face, everything, then. And I had gotten off insulin. My blood sugars were fine. And then starting in February of 2018, my blood sugar started getting elevated. Well, come to find out in later that year, 2019? 18, 17, where am I? Okay, yeah, so the start of 2018, realized it's the, okay, I'm like, where am I at? So all of 2018, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Because my blood sugars kept becoming elevated. And I was eating 0 carb. There was no reason why that should happen. So in May of 2018, I developed vertigo, had vertigo for 6 weeks. And then in August or September, I started a drug called Farxiga. And Farxiga is for diabetics. Well, guess what? It gave me diabetic ketoacidosis. Ended up in ICU. I mean, I literally almost died. Ended up in ICU. And then in the start of 2019 is when I realized that it was the mycophenolate causing the issue, because mycophenolate can cause type 2, it causes hyperglycemia, and it can cause people who to develop type 2 diabetes. And of course, I'm already that's my first disease. 2006, I was diagnosed as type 2 diabetic. So at this point, I have type 2 diabetes, I have myasthenia gravis, I have all the crap going on with my back. And then at the beginning of 2019, I started having a lot of pain and swelling in the joints in my hands. And one thing to note, because myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disease, it's a neurological autoimmune disease. Once you've developed one, you almost always develop another one. So let's see. So that got me, so in May of, I think it was April or May, I went to my neurologist and asked her to switch me off Cellcept, mycophenolate, and she switched me to the generic of Imurin, I don't remember how to pronounce it, which is azathioprine. In June 11th of 2019, I ended up in the hospital with my herniated disc. I had a ruptured disc in my back. I was in the hospital for a couple of days, in a wheelchair for a month, did physical therapy, got through my walker, went to see my regular doctor, and he was like, why haven't you had surgery yet? And I was like, the doctor said I didn't need it. And he's like, but you could step off a curb and break, do something to your back. And not 10 minutes later, at this point, I was using just the regular walker. Not 10 minutes later, I was trying to get that walker into the car trunk, and something happened and I almost fell to the ground. And then I ended up going back to the doctor, and he decided he wanted to perform surgery. So I had a laminate. Oh, okay. So then, two days after, so June 11th or 12th is when I went in the hospital. I was supposed to have an appointment on June 14th with the rheumatologist. My timeline, I should have wrote notes. So we had to move that rheumatologist appointment to August. So I go see the neurosurgeon, and he's like, okay, we'll operate in October. I said, okay. So I go to the rheumatologist, and she's like, you have rheumatoid arthritis. And I'm like, great, okay. So I started a chemo drug called methotrexate, something to that effect. And it helped. It helped so much. So in October, I had the laminectomy. And at that point, I had to be off the the methotrexate, which is a chemo drug. But I could still take the azathioprine, which is the immunosuppressant. So in November, my incision opened back up, and I spent 2 more days in the hospital. And at this point, I was off the methotrexate and the azathioprine. Oh, I couldn't breathe. And I had seen my neurologist and my rheumatologist at the end of October, and the rheumatologist was like, she's like, how's your pain level with all of this? And I'm like, I'm experiencing quite a bit of pain in my hand. And she's like, well, I could put you on a steroid. And I was like, no, thank you. Like, the last thing I need is to try to be recovering from, surgery and my blood sugars being out of control, because all steroids make my blood sugars go out of control. So after spending a couple of days in the hospital, at the end of November, 1st of December, I finally got in to see the wound care clinic because it still hadn't closed by that time. So I did wound care until December 23rd, and I graduated from wound care. And then last week, 2 weeks ago, my incision opened back up. So that's kind of where I've been as far as so let's just recap. So I'm type 2 diabetic. At the beginning of the year, I was taking 100 units of insulin every night. I am down to 70 units of insulin every night. My blood sugars have been running right in around the 140s, 130s, 140s, 150s. So I'm controlling my diabetes with the insulin and through my diet, and my goal is to get completely back off insulin. Now that I'm on a drug that doesn't cause hyperglycemia, my numbers are doing really, really well. Unfortunately, I was down to 357 in October of 2018, and I started this year at like 407 or 408. So I'd gained a ton of weight back, and I knew I would, because in February of 2019, I had to go back on insulin. And so I knew my weight loss would stop. And then in March, I had to bump up my Lyrica, which is a nerve pain medicine, to 300, which also causes weight gain. So I kind of ballooned back up, and I've been doing what I can to, try to get that back under control. I'm losing a ton of inches. The scale hasn't moved much, but I'm losing a ton of inches. So that's kind of how I'm trying to tend, which is my word of the year, to my diabetes. As far as the myasthenia, there's not much I can do. I can, I take the myasthenia. I take the azathioprine every morning, and then I take the Mestinon, every 2 hours or so, and that helps sometimes. And then for the OPLL, there's going to have to be a surgery. I'm hoping 10 or 15, 20 years down the road, not anytime soon. Basically, the neurosurgeon said that he's like, that's not going to be a neck surgery. That's going to be an entire spine surgery. And they don't want to do anything until, it gets to be where I can't handle it. You know what I mean? So for that, I basically live on lidocaine patches. Today, which is January the 25th, today is the first day in almost a year that I was able to go out in public without using a walker or a wheelchair. I don't have any lidocaine patches, and my pain level is about a 3. I was dealing with sciatica the whole entire month of December, and that was just... and January too. It started 2 weeks before Christmas, and it just ended last week. And so it's a struggle. It's been a real struggle. So, but that's what I'm using to treat the OPLL for now. The main spot is I call it my buffalo hump. I don't know if you guys can see that. Excuse me, right there. They showed me on the MRI. There's no room in my spinal canal right there. The spinal cord and whatever is in there is literally touching all around the spinal canal. So it causes a lot of issues. If I'm crafting at my table for too long, if I'm reading, if I'm doing this for too long, it can cause a bunch of issues in my back. But you know, until I'm to a point where we have to fix it, it's just going to be what it is. As far as the rheumatoid arthritis, I restarted the chemotherapy drug. I don't know if she'll switch me to something else. I see her in, I think, February 10th. So yeah, I mean, and then for my mental health, I didn't see my therapist the entire month of December, and I've seen him a couple of weeks this month. I'm still taking Wellbutrin. I had started Cymbalta in 2018, and it made me suicidal. So I had to get off that. And I was off antidepressant for a little bit, and then I just finally had to go back on one. So I'm on Wellbutrin. I'm taking 450 milligrams of that. So I just recently added, so I have a multivitamin. I have to take an extra dose of vitamin C. I started a probiotic. I take, let's see, I take Lyrica or Pregabalin or whatever. Thank God for a generic, because last year I paid $200 for my very first prescription. So in the mornings I take 1 Lyrica, 3 azathioprines, 1 diclofenac, which is a anti-inflammatory. I take a water pill, Lasix, and I take potassium. At night I take another diclofenac. On Mondays I take 6 methotrexate. What else do I take? I do a multivitamin. I do hair, skin, and nails vitamin. I do a Zyrtec. I do another Lyrica. The probiotic. I think there's another one that I'm missing. So I'm basically taking 25 pills a day. It's a lot. But yeah, and as far as my energy level, it, you know, people always complain that I gripe too much in my videos about, you know, what's going on with me, but it's like, it affects every minute of my day. I've mentioned that, I mean, it affects every single minute of my day. And unless you live with chronic pain or you have a chronic illness, you just cannot understand. You just cannot understand. And I don't know what I would do if I was a parent. So for those of you who are a parent and you're struggling, just try to find a good support system. I mean, I know that's easier said than done. And I want to have a whole conversation, maybe another episode talking about, you know, friends and family and dealing with your chronic illness, etc. So yeah, so that's kind of my story. And like I said, I wanted to kick off this with just kind of my story and my journey. And everyone's going to be different because every chronic illness is different and every person is different. So leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think of this series. If it's something that you think is interesting, do you think it's something that is useful? If you have particular topics that you'd like me to talk about, I mean, then basically this is just a commentary, or I'm giving my opinion or sharing my story. I'll try to share as much information as I can. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description box down below to the Spoonie Theory. I think there's a book. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's a book. Etc. So yeah, and I think if you Google it, you'll probably find, or YouTube it. I don't even Google anymore. If I need to know something, I just come to YouTube. So yeah. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I ask that you be kind in the comments. I will be monitoring them really heavily, not for my benefit, but for other people's benefits. Dealing with a chronic illness can be very taxing emotionally and mentally. And I don't want somebody to come into my comment section for support and see somebody spouting bullshit. So, you know, keep your essential oils and your magic pills and stuff like that out of my comment section. If you have information to share, etc., that's not a miracle drug or something like that, please feel free to share it. Maybe we can connect in the comments if you find somebody who has something similar to you. Like I said, if it's something down the road we want to think about as a Facebook group, we can think about that too. Someone else would have to moderate it, etc. So so if you're suffering with a chronic illness, you're not alone. And that's really what this is about. I want us to grow a community so we can offer support to each other. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't subscribed and you're interested in this comment, please feel free. I will have a playlist. I'll put this video in a playlist specifically for the Spoonie Diaries, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Okay, that's a lot of talking.